Welcome to Christ Temple Church, Grand Rapids, where our pastor is Suffragan Bishop Tony Thomas. I am Evangelist Valencia Agnew, and it is time for Tuesday Reflections, so grab your journal and take some notes. I want us to think about something many of us don't recognize until later, and that is how God uses struggles to build our trust. And sometimes when we are in difficult seasons, it feels like all we're doing is trying to get through. We pray, we wait, we cry. Lord knows I cry. We ask questions. And sometimes we wonder why God allowed that particular thing in our lives anyway. But then another situation comes later, and suddenly we realize I'm responding differently than I would have before. And this is often because trust has grown. I personally am thinking about a season when I had to trust God and I was trying everything on my own, but I really had to trust Him step by step. And all I could stand on was His last word until He gave another word. And then something recently came up, and I realized how much I trust God, how much more than I did then, and how my trust grew in that situation. Trusting in God, it usually doesn't happen all at once. It develops over time and through experience, through disappointments, through delays, and through seeing that God remains faithful. Let's take a look at Abraham. At first, Abraham trusted God enough to leave what was familiar, but his trust still had room to grow. God promised him a son, but when the promise took time, what happened? Abraham tried to help God fulfill it himself. Later, however, we see a very different Abraham. We see one that was willing to place Isaac on the altar because by then he had learned something deeper about God's character, and it made the promise that God could be trusted with what mattered the most. And then there's Moses. Moses at the burning bush, he questioned everything. He questioned his ability, his voice, his worthiness. Yet the same Moses who hesitated at the beginning eventually stood before the sea with confidence. And that was because of every encounter with God that he had, it built another layer of trust. Every plague, every confrontation, every miracle taught him that what frightened him did not intimidate God in the slightest. And then we see David. Before David even faced Goliath, he had already faced a lion and a bear. And those private battles became the reason he could stand publicly without or with confidence. And David understood that the same God who kept him before would keep him again. And sometimes what nobody sees is what prepares you for what everybody will see later. What's happening in private will be made public and on display later. And think about Peter. Peter trusted God enough to step out on the water, but he also sank. His trust was imperfect. He failed, he denied Jesus, he broke emotionally, yet later he became bold, steady, and powerful. His trust grew not because he never failed, but because he learned that even when he failed, God still held him. God is still faithful. And finally, Joseph. Joseph had dreams early, but everything that followed looked opposite of the promise. I mean, Joseph went through betrayal, slavery, prison, waiting. Yet years later, Joseph could look back and say, God meant it for good. That kind of statement, that only comes from someone whose trust has been tested and strengthened over time. That's why struggles are often doing more than hurting us. They are shaping us. So, what you are facing right now may not only be about survival, it may be because God is preparing your spirit to trust Him on another level. Sometimes you don't realize how much trust has grown until life happens again and you notice, wait a minute, I still don't have all of the answers, but I'm not shaken the way I used to. Or I still don't know how this is going to work out, but I've seen God before. The same God. I still feel pressure, but I also feel peace. And that is growth. So I want you to reflect on this. What if the struggle you survived was not wasted? What if it was teaching you how trustworthy God has always been? Because often the next challenge reveals that while you were praying to get out, God was quietly building trust within. Be encouraged. God is still using every season of your life, every season. This struggle is teaching you to trust God. Thank you for listening in on our Tuesday Reflections.